I still remember the first time I met Emily. It was the spring of 2011, and I was 27, a young software engineer trying to climb the ladder in a Boston-based tech company that thought a free coffee machine made them progressive. I was sitting in this dimly lit bar downtown, the Lantern, the kind of place that looked fancy but smelled faintly of beer and salt. She walked in wearing this yellow sundress, her hair tied back loosely, and for a moment I thought she looked like someone who belonged in sunlight, not in a city that was perpetually gray half the year. She laughed too easily, I remember thinking that. And when she talked, she made you feel like you were the only one in the room worth listening to. It wasn't love at first sight, not the dramatic movie kind, but there was something about her that softened me. I had been through a breakup just months before, one that left me with this quiet emptiness that I carried around like an invisible bruise. But with Emily, it was like someone opened the curtains again. We started dating soon after. She worked as a marketing assistant at a publishing company. She had this energy, always planning, always dreaming. She wanted to travel to Greece, start her own book club, learn how to paint. I used to joke that she was a storm in a teacup, small, contained, but impossible to ignore. For a long time, things were good. Really good. We moved in together after 2 years, got married in 2015 in a small ceremony in Cape Cod. Just family, a few close friends, and a ridiculously expensive cake that she insisted on because, in her words, if we're going to start forever, it better taste like heaven. I didn't argue. I was just happy. We bought a small 2-bedroom house in Quincy, Massachusetts. I'd saved up a decent amount, and with both our incomes, it wasn't a stretch. Life settled into a rhythm, the kind of rhythm that feels boring only when you look back, but in the moment, feels like peace. I'd wake up early, make coffee, she'd hum in the kitchen while feeding our dog, Milo, a golden retriever we adopted after our first anniversary. We'd argue about silly things, like who forgot to buy milk or who left the lights on, and laugh it off an hour later. People talk about love like it's this constant high. But in truth, it's more like a quiet river. Most days it just flows, calm, predictable, and you get used to the sound of it. You stop noticing it's there until one day, it's gone. Looking back now, I can see the cracks, the little moments that didn't make sense at the time. It started small. Around 2019, she began working later than usual. Her company had shifted to remote marketing campaigns for European clients, so her hours, she said, had to adjust. I didn't question it at first. I trusted her. Trust was something I believed came naturally when two people shared a bed and a mortgage. But then she started getting distant. Not in a loud way. More like emotionally absent. She'd be sitting right next to me on the couch, her phone lighting up every few seconds, her face illuminated by that soft glow, and yet she'd feel miles away. When I'd ask who it was, she'd smile, that small, dismissive smile, and say it was just work. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. Because admitting otherwise meant tearing apart the very foundation of what I thought my life was. The first real red flag came on my birthday, February 14th, 2020. Yes, Valentine's Day. I was born on a day that people associate with love, which now feels like some kind of cosmic joke. She said she couldn't take the day off because of an important presentation. She promised we'd celebrate the next night. That night, I remember sitting alone in our living room, a half-eaten pizza box on the table, a movie playing that I wasn't really watching. Around 10 p.m., she texted me saying she'd be home late, don't wait up. That phrase, I'd heard it before, but that night it felt heavy. Like something inside me twisted. When she got home past midnight, she smelled faintly of perfume, not hers. I knew her scent, the floral one she'd used since college. This one was sharper, muskier. She said she'd had drinks with colleagues after the presentation. I smiled and said it was fine. But something inside me shifted that night. A quiet unease that didn't leave. Then the pandemic hit. March 2020. Everything shut down, and for a while, I thought maybe this was our reset button. We both started working from home, spending more time together. We cooked, watched shows, even tried to learn how to bake sourdough like everyone else on the internet. But as the months passed, I noticed she spent a lot of time in her office, really just our guest room, with the door closed. I'd knock sometimes, ask if she wanted coffee, and she'd snap, saying she was in a meeting. I'd catch glimpses of her laptop screen sometimes, not intentionally, just walking past, and there'd be a chat window open, not a work email. The kind with emojis, casual tones. Once, I caught a message that said, "I miss your face." She quickly minimized the screen, laughing nervously. Said it was a joke from a coworker. I told myself not to overthink. That's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt until it becomes self-destruction. By late 2021, things had changed. The world was reopening, but our marriage wasn't. We went out less, touched less, talked less. She started going to the gym after work, said she wanted to focus on herself. And I wanted to be supportive, so I didn't question why her workouts lasted 3 hours or why she started wearing perfume to the gym. It's funny, though. The human brain has a way of protecting you from pain by ignoring it. But the body knows. I'd wake up some nights feeling uneasy, my stomach in knots, like my subconscious was screaming while my conscious mind kept shushing it. The real turning point came in early 2022. I was on a work trip to Chicago, 3 days long. On the second night, I called her, but she didn't pick up. Tried again an hour later. Still nothing. I texted. No reply. I told myself she was probably asleep. But when I came home 2 days later, there was something off about the house. Milo, our dog, barked at the door like he always did, but there was an unfamiliar smell lingering in the air, a mix of cologne and something metallic, maybe deodorant. That night, I noticed one of our wine glasses in the sink, next to a second one I didn't remember using. Her explanation: "Oh, Sarah came over for a chat." Except Sarah, her best friend, later mentioned she hadn't seen Emily in weeks. I started noticing more things. Small, stupid things that only someone in love would notice. A shirt that smelled faintly of aftershave. Her laughter that sounded too giddy when she texted someone. The way she started guarding her phone like it contained national secrets. Then one night, she left her phone on the couch while taking a shower. It buzzed, a notification from someone saved as Evan W. I don't know what compelled me to look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was survival. Either way, I opened it. The messages were undeniable, intimate, explicit, pictures, voice notes. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. It felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. The man, Evan, wasn't just some random coworker. I recognized the name. He was her gym trainer. The first thought wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. Like my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I remember staring at the screen, reading and rereading their messages until the words blurred. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting there, frozen. She saw her phone in my hand, and her face drained of color. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just asked quietly, "How long?" She cried, said it was a mistake, said it just happened. That phrase, just happened, it still haunts me. As if infidelity was an accident, like spilling a drink, not a choice made again and again. I didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the guest room. I sat in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying our years together like an old movie. All the birthdays, the anniversaries, the inside jokes, now tainted. I wondered which moments were real and which were just performances. The next morning, I left for work early, even though it was Saturday. I just needed to get out. I remember driving aimlessly through the quiet streets, the early morning mist clinging to the windshield, and thinking, what the hell do I do now? I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Not even my best friend, Matt, who would have told me to lawyer up immediately. I kept it to myself because admitting it out loud would make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. Weeks passed. She apologized every day, begged me to go to therapy with her, promised it was over. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to salvage something, not because she deserved it, but because I didn't know who I was without her. But people don't change because they get caught. They change because they want to. And Emily, she didn't want to. She just wanted me to stop noticing. Because a month later, I caught her again. Different day. Same man. And that's when something inside me broke, quietly, irreversibly. I stopped being the man who forgave. I started being the man who remembered. And I began planning. Carefully. Patiently. Because if she thought her affair was a secret, she had no idea what I was capable of once I stopped pretending to be blind. It was July 2022, and the summer heat in Quincy was relentless. The kind of heat that made the sidewalks shimmer, made the air stick to your skin. That year, I spent more nights awake than asleep, replaying the small betrayals, the hidden messages, the late-night excuses. I'd sit on the porch, a glass of scotch sweating in my hand, Milo at my feet, thinking about how I got here. About how a life that had seemed so ordinary, so safe, could unravel in the quietest ways. The breaking point didn't hit all at once. It came in layers, each more corrosive than the last. I remember one Tuesday afternoon, just after lunch, I was working from home, my office set up in the corner of our living room, when I saw it. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't even consciously think about it. But something in my peripheral vision caught the glint of the screen. It lit up, and the notification read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you." I froze. My coffee cup shook in my hand. I couldn't process it at first, not because I didn't understand, but because my brain refused to accept that this was happening again. I walked toward the counter, and as I reached for her phone, a wave of nausea rolled over me. There it was, a series of messages from Evan. Dates, times, plans. Explicit. Detailed. My hands, which I'd always considered steady, trembled uncontrollably. I left the room, trying to steady my breathing. Milo barked once, like he sensed my distress, and then settled back at my feet. That dog had been the only constant in a life that suddenly felt upside down. I leaned against the wall, thinking about the wedding photos on the shelf. Her smile. That damn dress she wore at our wedding. All of it suddenly seemed like a lie. I wanted to confront her immediately, to scream, to destroy, to demand explanations. But something inside me told me to wait. To observe. To remember. I'd been too emotional the first time. Too naive. Too willing to forgive. Not this time. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That evening, she told me she was going to catch up with a friend after work. I nodded, masking my rising suspicion, pretending to scroll through emails while my mind raced. I knew it was Evan. I didn't need proof. The texts, the times, the subtle changes in her behavior over months had made it undeniable. I followed her, not in a creepy, obsessive way, but cautiously. I kept my distance, parked across the street from the gym she said she was visiting. And then I saw them. Emily, laughing, leaning into Evan, his arm around her shoulder. My chest tightened. The sight made my stomach turn, my vision blur. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was reality, the kind you can't erase with denial or hope. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching, listening to the casual intimacy, the way she touched him, the whispered laughter. I thought about all the mornings she'd kissed me goodbye, the nights she'd pretended to fall asleep next to me. I realized in that moment that she had been living two lives, and I had been nothing more than a placeholder, a convenience. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through the motions, dinner, TV, empty conversation, but inside, a storm was raging. I felt rage, yes, but also something darker, a desire for complete reckoning. I didn't just want to end it. I wanted her to understand the weight of her choices. I wanted Evan to understand too. And somewhere in that dark corner of my mind, the idea formed, dangerous, obsessive, maybe even immoral, that if they thought they could hurt me without consequence, they were wrong. Over the next few weeks, I became methodical. I didn't act on impulse. I collected evidence, screenshots, voice notes, timestamps. I kept meticulous records of every interaction, every suspicious activity. I knew that if I acted too soon, I'd risk losing control. And control was everything now. It was mid-August when I found the final piece I needed, confirmation. She had left her email logged in on the laptop. I didn't even have to hack or guess passwords. Everything was there, flight confirmations, hotel bookings, private messages, intimate photos. It was like a Pandora's box, and once I opened it, there was no going back. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but I felt alive. Not in a happy way, but in a raw, feral way. The breaking point came that Saturday. It was the kind of day that starts normal, sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and ends in irreversible change. I had Milo with me, pacing the floor, sensing my agitation. Emily left around noon, telling me she was going grocery shopping. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. The evidence I had was enough. What I needed now was resolve. I opened my laptop and started drafting messages. Not to her. Not to me. To Evan's wife. Her name, which I had discovered accidentally while scrolling through a public social media post, felt foreign on my tongue. I typed, deleted, retyped. The first few sentences were calm, clinical, almost cold. I attached screenshots, every message, every photo, every trace of the affair. I didn't embellish. I didn't lie. I simply presented the truth. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the send button. I thought about the consequences. Divorce, confrontation, ruin. But then I thought about Emily, about how she had lied to me for years, about how she had broken our vows, our trust, our life. And I pressed send. Almost immediately, I received a response. Not angry, not defensive. Just silence. But I knew the storm had started. That evening, Emily came home, unaware of what had already happened. She smelled of perfume again, the same scent that haunted my memories. I didn't say a word. I just watched her, coldly, as she unpacked groceries. She didn't notice my silence at first. Then, she glanced at her phone and saw the notifications. That's when the change hit her. The panic. The realization. Her face went pale, her hands trembling. For a moment, she looked like the person I had married, scared, vulnerable. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of confrontation. I simply turned away, walked into the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Milo curled up next to me, sensing the tension, sensing the rupture. By the next morning, the news had spread. Evan's wife had confronted him. Emily's texts to him were replayed, dissected, shared. I didn't participate. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. And as I watched their lives implode, a part of me felt relief. Not happiness. Not victory. Just relief that the truth was out, that the lie was over. But it wasn't without cost. Watching her panic, seeing the fear in her eyes, brought a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. I remembered all the nights I had stayed up worrying about our marriage, all the moments I had forgiven her, all the times I had smiled and pretended everything was okay. And now, the roles were reversed. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was the culmination of months, years, even, of small betrayals, subtle lies, and emotional distance. And once it happened, there was no turning back. In the days that followed, I became almost obsessive in documenting everything. Every interaction with Emily, every message she sent, every attempt she made to apologize or explain. I didn't act out of malice. I acted out of preservation. I wanted to protect myself from the chaos she had created, from the betrayal I had endured. I remember one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the blinds drawn, a half-empty bottle of wine beside me, scrolling through the screenshots one last time. I realized then that the person I had been, trusting, forgiving, naive, no longer existed. I had been forced into a new version of myself. One that was patient, strategic, and coldly logical. One that understood the power of evidence, the weight of truth, and the inevitability of consequence. And in that moment, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Because what I had done, sending those screenshots, was more than just confrontation. It was destruction. Not of myself. Not of my dignity. But of the illusion Emily had built. And once the illusion was gone, there was no coming back. That week, the messages, the confrontations, the fallout, they were everywhere. Friends who knew Evan's wife called me, bewildered, some even thanking me. I didn't seek their approval. I didn't want it. I simply watched as the truth dismantled the web of lies. And Emily, she became unrecognizable. The confident, vibrant woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone desperate, fearful, and enraged. I didn't revel in it. But I didn't hide from it either. I let her feel the weight of her choices, just as I had borne the weight of her betrayal for months. That was the breaking point. That was the moment when everything shifted. When the life I thought I knew, The marriage, the love, the shared history, was irrevocably changed. And when I realized, finally, that there was no going back to the person I had been before, I felt a strange clarity. The next steps were clear. The damage had been done. The consequences had begun. And I was ready to face whatever came next, not as a victim, but as someone who had been forced to reclaim control over a life that had been stolen from them, piece by piece. The fallout hit like a storm I hadn't seen coming, even though I should have. It wasn't immediate. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches on the front porch. At least, not in the way movies show. It was quieter, slower, and somehow more devastating because it seeped into every corner of my life. Emily became a ghost of herself. She moved into the guest room, then eventually stayed with her sister for a few weeks. She tried to call me constantly, crying, begging, swearing it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. But the truth is, I had stopped hearing her. The words were meaningless now. I had been living with lies for years. Apologies were just echoes. I didn't answer. I didn't block her number. I just let it exist, a reminder of the wreckage she had caused. I remember sitting alone one evening in August, the house feeling impossibly large without her presence, Milo curled up beside me, and realizing that grief doesn't always announce itself with tears. Sometimes, it's the quiet hollow that fills your chest, the way your hands shake when you try to cook, the restless energy that keeps you pacing the floors at 2 in the morning. That was grief, silent, pervasive, almost suffocating. Work became a lifeline. I buried myself in projects, late nights, video calls, deadlines. My colleagues noticed a change. Less humor, less chatter, more focus. Some asked if I was okay. I lied. I said everything was fine, even though inside I felt shattered. My friends tried to reach out, but I found it impossible to explain the complexity of betrayal. How do you condense years of deception, months of suspicion, into a simple conversation? Most of the time, I didn't try. Then there was the social fallout. Word spreads quickly, even in the most controlled circles. By September, Emily's affair had become a topic among our mutual friends, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Some sided with me silently, sending texts of support. Others, those who had always been closer to Emily, sent me judgmental glances, like I had orchestrated some cruel drama just for attention. The truth was messy, and in messy situations, people pick sides based on comfort, not justice. The hardest part was family. My parents called, gentle but probing, asking if we were okay, if we had worked things out. I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. I couldn't admit that my marriage had been dismantled piece by piece while I slept next to the person I trusted most. So I lied. I said we were working through some challenges, that communication was key, that love was complicated. And they accepted it because that's what parents do. They hope for the best, they suspend disbelief, they hold on to the version of reality they want to see. Emily's family, however, didn't hold back. Her mother called, shouting, crying, demanding to know why I had destroyed their daughter's life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their precious Emily, the one who smiled for family photos and laughed at holiday dinners, had been living a lie, and suddenly, I was the villain. It was infuriating, but I didn't argue. I let them rage. The chaos was theirs now. I was simply the observer. Even mundane things became reminders of the betrayal. Walking into the kitchen, seeing the coffee mugs she always left on the counter. Passing her favorite chair in the living room. Milo, sensing my tension, would follow me from room to room, his head pressed against my leg as if trying to anchor me to some semblance of normalcy. I clung to him, not just because he was loyal and loving, but because he was one of the few constants in a life that suddenly felt unmoored. Sleep was impossible. Every night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying events in my mind, imagining conversations, rehearsing scenarios. I thought about revenge, sure, but more than that, I thought about closure. I wanted to understand how someone could betray so completely, how the intimacy we shared, our years together, could be reduced to a few stolen moments and secret messages. It felt like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. By October, I had taken a few steps toward legal protection. I met with a lawyer, someone who specialized in divorce cases, and began understanding my rights, my options. I wasn't impulsive. I didn't want to file immediately. I wanted to assess, to be certain. But knowing the framework, understanding the potential outcomes, gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt since discovering the affair. It was empowering, in a clinical sort of way, to realize that the law could serve as a tool to reclaim some of what had been taken from me. The emotional fallout, however, was far more corrosive. I developed this strange habit of checking her social media, not to reconnect, not to spy out of obsession, but to understand, to gauge the depth of her new life, the distance between us. I watched as she posted photos, carefully curated, smiling with friends, at restaurants, traveling. And every time, I felt this combination of anger, sadness, and hollow admiration. She was living, truly living, while I was trapped in the aftermath of her choices. I realized, painfully, that trust isn't just broken by betrayal. It's broken by the knowledge that someone you love could find intimacy, happiness, and excitement outside of your shared life. It's broken by the understanding that the person you thought you knew most intimately is capable of keeping entire worlds hidden from you. By November, I had begun a slow, tentative attempt at self-preservation. I started journaling late at night, pouring all the anguish, rage, and disbelief into pages that no one would ever read. I went running early in the mornings, the cold Massachusetts air biting at my lungs, as if punishment and clarity could coexist in every stride. I joined therapy, reluctantly at first, and then fully, realizing that professional guidance was the only way to navigate the maze of emotions without completely losing myself. One day, in mid-November, I received a call from Evan's wife. Her voice was tight, strained with disbelief. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just asked questions, wanting to understand. And for the first time, I felt the ripple of justice, or at least vindication. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain everything. I simply confirmed the truth and let her process it on her own. There was a sense of weight lifting, knowing that the chain of deception had reached its inevitable conclusion and that I had played a part in dismantling it. But the fallout wasn't just external. It seeped into me in ways I couldn't anticipate. I lost weight, not dramatically, but enough that friends started noticing. My sleep was fractured. I'd wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, heart pounding, memories of her laughter, her lies, the texts, the images, replaying in my mind like a relentless loop. My emotional resilience felt exhausted. I realized then that trauma isn't always sudden. Sometimes it's slow, insidious, creeping into your daily life until you realize you're navigating a world that feels fundamentally different from the one you knew. Even family gatherings became strained. Thanksgiving 2022 was a blur of half-hearted smiles, careful conversation, and quiet observations. Emily wasn't there. I sat with my parents and Milo, who had joined me in the car ride down, sensing the tension. I forced myself to laugh at stories, to nod at jokes, but inside, I was replaying every betrayal, every lie, every stolen moment. The laughter around me felt distant, like I was watching it through a pane of frosted glass. Work, ironically, remained a sanctuary. I buried myself in deadlines, presentations, and late-night coding sessions. I found solace in creation, in the tangible results of effort and focus, something the betrayal had taken away from my personal life. But even there, the echoes followed me. Emails I sent, projects I led, they carried a weight, a tension, a vigilance I hadn't known before. By December, I had begun making small, deliberate changes. I removed her personal items from the house, carefully packing them away. I didn't throw anything out. I didn't want to erase the past entirely, just reclaim my space. Her perfume bottles, her clothing, the books she had left on the shelf, all gone into storage. Milo was my constant companion, and for him, I bought new toys, fresh treats, even a new bed. Small gestures, but they grounded me. I realized that part of the fallout wasn't just about Emily or the affair. It was about me. About the way I had allowed someone else's deception to shape my life, my emotions, my reality. I needed to rebuild, not just the house, not just my routines, but my understanding of trust, boundaries, and self-worth. And yet, even as I took steps forward, there were moments when the anger returned, sudden and intense. Seeing her photo on social media, hearing a friend mention her casually, even walking past the gym where I first saw her with Evan, all of it sparked that visceral, gut-level reaction. But instead of acting, I wrote it down, processed it, let it pass. I had learned, painfully, that immediate reaction only prolongs suffering. Control, patience, and documentation had been my allies. They remained so. Through it all, I realized one inescapable truth. The fallout of betrayal doesn't end with confrontation. It doesn't end with evidence or revenge. It continues, slowly, quietly, reshaping your daily life, your perception of love, your sense of self. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it without letting it crush you. By late December, I could see a faint outline of what life might look like beyond the chaos. I wasn't whole, not by a long shot. But I had begun reclaiming my narrative. Emily's betrayal had been brutal, but it had forced me to awaken, to recognize my own resilience, and to understand the depths of my capacity for patience, strategy, and emotional endurance. Milo lay beside me that evening, head on my lap, as I stared at the Christmas lights flickering outside the window. I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection, acknowledging the pain, the loss, the anger, and then letting it coexist with a small flicker of hope. I wasn't okay yet. Not by any stretch. But I had survived the initial storm, and survival was the first step toward reclaiming a life that had been stolen from me. By the beginning of 2023, I realized something crucial. The chaos, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it had made me reactive for months. I had spent endless nights ruminating, replaying, strategizing small steps, but now I wanted more than survival. I wanted to reclaim my life. Not through vengeance alone, though there was a part of me that still burned with that desire, but through deliberate action that would restore control and, more importantly, my sense of self. It started with boundaries. I made it very clear, in writing and verbally when necessary, that Emily's access to the house, my finances, or my personal space was limited. She had no say in anything unless it was legally necessary. That first week of asserting these boundaries was tense. She tested them subtly, leaving texts that dripped guilt or passive aggression. I ignored most of them. I didn't respond. The silence, I discovered, was a powerful tool. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. Next came her digital footprint. I'd learned early on that evidence was power. And while I had already sent the screenshots to Evan's wife, there were other people, colleagues, mutual friends, even acquaintances, who had no idea what had been happening. I began quietly gathering more. I saved emails, chat logs, even financial transactions that revealed the depth of their secret encounters. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about protecting myself from the lies she could continue spinning. The more meticulous I became, the more I felt in control. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was strategizing. But it wasn't all cold calculation. I also began focusing on rebuilding emotionally. I went back to therapy regularly, not just to vent, but to learn how to process the rage, the grief, and the betrayal without letting it define me. I journaled daily, sometimes obsessively, writing out every thought, every memory, every tiny suspicion or fear I'd carried. Writing became a form of exorcism. I realized that if I didn't externalize these emotions, they would eat me alive. I started exercising more, running through Quincy's streets in the early mornings when the mist hung low over the sidewalks. The physical exertion cleared my mind and gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt in months. Milo accompanied me, bounding ahead with boundless energy, tail wagging, oblivious to human complexities. He reminded me that life could be simple again, even if only for a few miles at a time. One afternoon, in February 2023, I got an unexpected message. It was from one of Emily's co-workers, someone I had barely spoken to before. The tone was careful, almost wary. "I heard about everything. Are you okay?" My first instinct was suspicion. Why now, months later? But I responded politely, acknowledging the message. Over time, she became an ally of sorts, quietly validating my experience and offering insight into Emily's behavior at work. It was another piece of the puzzle, confirming that Emily's deception extended far beyond what I had already discovered. And then there was Evan. I hadn't interacted with him directly since sending the screenshots, but the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Friends who had mutual connections shared what they knew. He had been confronted, humiliated, and forced into accountability. I felt no joy in his discomfort, only relief that the truth had emerged fully and that Emily could no longer hide behind him. The world had corrected itself, in a way, without me needing to take unnecessary risks. Around March, I began thinking about Emily's accountability in a more direct sense. I didn't want vengeance that destroyed, only resolution that clarified. I started documenting everything in a way that could be used legally if necessary. The affair, the deceptions, the financial inconsistencies, the emotional manipulation. Every message, every photo, every timestamp was organized chronologically. I felt a strange satisfaction in this methodical approach. For months, chaos had ruled my life. Now order returned. One morning, while reviewing these records, I realized something. I had grown stronger. Not bitter, not vengeful in a mindless way, but strong. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and months of emotional turmoil. I had taken control of my life while remaining composed, strategic, and self-aware. This wasn't the man who had sat in the living room that first night, staring at her phone, heartbreaking. This was someone forged in fire, tempered by betrayal, and unshakable in clarity. That spring, I made a conscious decision to reclaim joy. I started small, coffee at a new cafe, walks in Quincy's Harbor. Evenings spent reading instead of replaying the past. I signed up for a photography class, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for. I focused on things that belonged to me, that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a mausoleum of memories. Milo became my constant companion, and his unshakable loyalty reminded me that love still existed in forms untouched by deceit. By May, Emily tried subtle attempts to draw me back into conflict. She would leave notes, call at odd hours, sometimes even send gifts. But by then, I had learned the power of detachment. I didn't engage. I didn't respond. The world had shifted. She no longer controlled the narrative. I did. The power of observation, documentation, and strategic patience had taught me more about control than any confrontation ever could. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. I discovered, through careful investigation and cross-referencing of messages, that Emily and Evan had been maintaining contact even after the screenshots were sent. They were careful, secretive, trying to avoid detection. But the evidence was there. I had everything I needed. I didn't need to confront them personally. I didn't need to rage or yell. I had already taken the high ground, clarity, patience, and truth as my weapons. It was June 2023 when I decided to act, not impulsively, not out of anger, but decisively. I compiled all the evidence and sent a detailed account to both their families. I didn't embellish. I didn't add commentary. I presented the facts, meticulously documented, chronologically organized. I had learned that emotion in delivery was dangerous. It clouds perception. Facts, however, cannot be ignored. The aftermath was immediate. Confrontations, questions, confessions, the chaos I had carefully observed before now unfolded on a larger scale. I didn't intervene. I didn't need to. The truth had set itself free. I watched, from a distance, as Emily and Evan faced the consequences of their actions, as their families processed the betrayal, as the facade of normalcy crumbled. And in that distance, I found a strange sense of peace. But turning the tables wasn't just about external action. It was about internal transformation. I realized that my strength didn't come from exposing them. It came from reclaiming myself. From recognizing that I had been a victim, yes, but also a survivor, someone capable of enduring, strategizing, and ultimately reclaiming dignity. I began to rebuild social connections, carefully and selectively. I reached out to friends who had been supportive, mended relationships that had been strained by secrecy, and let go of those who thrived on judgment or gossip. I stopped trying to convince anyone of my narrative. Instead, I lived it. My life became evidence of resilience. I also took steps to redefine my relationship with Emily. By July, she had moved out entirely. The house, once a battlefield of memories, began to feel like home again, mine, unshared, untainted. I organized, redecorated, and created spaces that reflected my life and identity rather than the remnants of betrayal. The act of physically reclaiming space was therapeutic in ways I hadn't anticipated. One evening, Milo and I were on the porch, watching the sunset over Quincy Harbor. The sky was painted in fiery oranges and soft purples, and I realized something profound. I had survived something that could have broken me entirely. And instead of letting it, I had used it as a catalyst to strengthen myself. I had turned devastation into clarity, betrayal into strategy, chaos into order. By late summer, I even allowed myself to entertain the idea of future relationships. Not immediately, not recklessly, but with the understanding that trust was earned, boundaries respected, and self-awareness maintained. I was no longer naive. I was cautious, yes, but in a way that felt empowering rather than fearful. Turning the tables, I realized, isn't always about revenge. Sometimes, it's about reclaiming power in ways that are quiet, precise, and enduring. It's about reconstructing your life, setting boundaries, and refusing to let someone else's choices define your existence. It's about learning that the greatest victory isn't in humiliation, but in transformation. By the time September 2023 arrived, I had fully stepped into this new version of myself. I was no longer the man who had spent months in disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. I was someone stronger, wiser, more self-aware, and more resilient. The betrayal had been catastrophic, yes, but it had also been a crucible. And I had emerged from it tempered, determined, and whole in ways I hadn't imagined possible. I didn't need to confront Emily again. I didn't need to argue, apologize, or justify. The truth had been told. The consequences had been felt. And I had survived, intact, unbroken, and more in control of my life than I had ever been. By October 2023, the world felt quieter, and in that quiet, I discovered something I hadn't realized I'd lost: myself. The months of chaos, betrayal, and emotional upheaval had left scars, yes, but they also forced clarity. I could breathe again without the weight of lies pressing on my chest. I could walk into a room and not flinch at imagined secrets or betrayals lurking in corners. And for the first time since July 2022, I felt the fragile but unmistakable sense of peace. The legal process had begun slowly but steadily. Emily and I had reached an understanding, not a friendship, not even civility, but a functional arrangement where the house, finances, and shared responsibilities were clearly divided. I had hired a mediator, someone professional and neutral, to ensure that our interactions remained strictly transactional. For months, I had feared confrontation, the sharp words, the manipulations. But with legal boundaries in place, the tension evaporated. She had her space. I had mine. And the middle ground, once fraught with emotional landmines, became neutral territory. Milo, ever my loyal companion, became my constant reminder that life could still have simple joys. He would follow me through Quincy streets on long walks, his leash taut with excitement, ears flopping, tail wagging. I began noticing the small things again: the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the cool breeze off the harbor in the late afternoon, the quiet satisfaction of a well-prepared dinner. These moments, once mundane, now felt like victories. They were reminders that life could continue, even flourish, after devastation. By November, I had even taken steps toward new beginnings, not romantic, but personal. I enrolled in a creative writing workshop, something I'd always wanted to do but never prioritized. The act of writing became therapeutic in ways I hadn't anticipated. I poured not only the rawness of my emotions into the pages, but also reflections on resilience, clarity, and the nature of human betrayal. The stories were fictionalized, yes, but they carried pieces of truth, fragments of heartbreak, fragments of triumph, that helped me process what I'd endured. Work remained my anchor. I threw myself into projects, not to escape, but to channel focus and purpose. I found that the discipline I had developed in documenting Emily and Evan's deceit translated seamlessly into productivity and strategy. The patience, attention to detail, and emotional regulation required to manage the fallout had honed skills I had never appreciated before. I began receiving recognition for my efforts at work, promotions, and opportunities that felt like validation, not just professionally but personally. It was proof that resilience could produce growth, that hardship could forge strength. Around the same time, Emily's life began to unravel publicly. I didn't instigate it, and I didn't take pleasure in it, but the repercussions of her actions were unavoidable. Mutual friends relayed snippets of confrontations, social media posts, and the uncomfortable truth of her double life. I observed from a distance, detached. I had realized long ago that satisfaction didn't come from watching her stumble, but from knowing that I had reclaimed control of my life and refused to be complicit in further deceit. Then came a quiet evening in December, the kind of night where the wind whispers through the bare branches and the first frost of winter coats the sidewalks. I was sitting on the porch with Milo, sipping tea and watching the stars appear over Quincy Harbor. It struck me how far I had come. The rage, the panic, the heartbreak, all of it had been processed, transformed into a tempered awareness of what mattered. I felt gratitude for the pain itself, twisted as that may sound, because it had forced me into growth I might never have pursued otherwise. I reflected on the months that had passed, the breaking point, the fallout, the careful strategizing, and ultimately the transformation. Each phase had been brutal, yet each had been necessary. I had confronted betrayal in the rawest form and emerged intact. Not unscathed, never unscathed, but stronger, more perceptive, and finally, more at peace. By January 2024, I began tentative steps toward new connections. Not romantic relationships, at least not immediately, but friendships and social interactions I had neglected during the turmoil. I reconnected with old friends, people who had drifted away not because of disloyalty but because life had simply pulled us apart. I discovered a quiet joy in these reconnections, a reminder that human bonds, when genuine, could withstand the turbulence of circumstance. I also started volunteering at a local community center. Helping others who faced emotional or relational crises became a way to channel my experience into something constructive. I spoke at small workshops about resilience, coping with betrayal, and reclaiming self-worth. I found that by helping others navigate their challenges, I could also reinforce my own healing. The act of listening, advising, and witnessing transformation in others became a mirror for my own growth. Spring arrived in March 2024, bringing with it a literal and figurative renewal. The harbor came alive with sunlight reflecting off the waves, the smell of salt and seaweed in the air. I started taking long walks without Milo occasionally, just me and my thoughts, appreciating the rhythm of life without the constant tension of past events. I began to notice joy in small interactions, a stranger smiling on the street, the laughter of children playing, the quiet satisfaction of completing a challenging project. These moments, once drowned out by betrayal and heartbreak, now seemed vibrant and meaningful. By this time, Emily had faded from my daily life. She was no longer a source of panic, anger, or distraction. Her presence had been reduced to memories and evidence stored away. Remnants of a chapter 1 had closed decisively. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I simply observed that the world had corrected itself in its own way, and I had emerged whole because I had focused on reclaiming my life rather than destroying hers. I also reflected on the moral complexity of my actions. Sending the screenshots to Evan's wife had been ruthless, yes, but it had been necessary. I had wrestled with guilt and questioned myself endlessly in the early days. Was this revenge? Was it cruel? Was I stooping to the level of deceit I despised? Over time, I realized it wasn't cruelty if it was truth. And it wasn't vengeance if it was measured, deliberate, and aimed at accountability rather than emotional satisfaction. It was justice in its most personal human form, messy, imperfect, and inevitable. Summer 2024 brought new experiences. I traveled for the first time since the ordeal, visiting the coast of Maine for a week-long retreat. The ocean, vast and relentless, reminded me that life continues, regardless of personal crises. I found solace in solitude, in the wind against my face, in the rhythm of waves crashing against rocks. The trip wasn't an escape but a reminder that the world is larger than any betrayal, any heartbreak, or any human failure. I also began dating again, tentatively and cautiously. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with awareness, boundaries, and self-respect. Each interaction was measured, and I was careful to observe red flags that I might have overlooked before. I discovered that trust could be rebuilt, even if slowly, and that the capacity to love again was still intact. The past had not destroyed me. It had prepared me to be more discerning, more present, and more intentional. By August 2024, nearly 2 years since the breaking point, I could finally reflect on the entirety of the ordeal without the suffocating weight of rage or despair. I had turned the tables in ways that mattered, legally, emotionally, socially. I had reclaimed my life, rebuilt my identity, and discovered resilience I hadn't known existed. The betrayal had been catastrophic, yes, but it had also been a crucible. And I had emerged from it tempered, strong, and capable of navigating the complexities of human relationships with wisdom and patience. Looking back, I realized the affair and its exposure had been a turning point in ways I hadn't anticipated. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, to set boundaries, to demand honesty, and, most importantly, to understand my own worth. I had learned that betrayal is devastating not just because of the act itself, but because it exposes vulnerabilities you may not have acknowledged. And yet, the recovery, the deliberate, methodical reclaiming of self, can be equally transformative. I also came to understand that revenge, when guided by clarity and necessity, isn't inherently cruel. It's a tool for accountability. And while I had no desire to see Emily suffer beyond what her actions had already caused, I recognized that my decisive action had prevented further deceit and harm. I had acted not from impulsive rage but from a calculated understanding of justice, one that allowed me to maintain integrity while ensuring truth prevailed. By September 2024, life had begun to feel ordinary again, in the best possible way. Ordinary in the sense of stability, routine, and peace. I still carried scars, but they were no longer raw. They were part of my history, part of the architecture of my life. I had learned to live with them, to let them inform but not define me. On a quiet evening in early October, I sat on my porch, Milo at my feet, watching the sun dip below the horizon over Quincy Harbor. The air smelled faintly of salt and falling leaves, a reminder that seasons change, and so do lives. I thought about the past 2 years, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the meticulous planning, the patience, the transformation. I realized then that I was grateful, not for the pain itself, but for the lessons it imparted, for the clarity it forced upon me, for the strength it revealed. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze wash over me, feeling a sense of completion I hadn't thought possible. The affair, the chaos, the exposure, it was all behind me. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had turned devastation into clarity, betrayal into empowerment. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Because in the end, it wasn't about destroying Emily or Evan. It was about reclaiming me. And that, I realized, was the truest form of victory.